Okay.
Uh,
Uh,
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I, Dr. Aman Sharma, Consultant Quality and Patient Safety Division, National Health Systems Resource Center. Extend my warm welcome to our Executive Director, Major General Professor Dr. Atul Kotwal, sir. Sena Medal, Wishes Seva Medal. Miss Winnie Arora, ma'am, Lead Consultant, Certification Unit, Quality and Patient Safety Division, NHSRC. Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, President, DSPRUD, and to all the participants who have joined us for this fifth session of the third STG series on management of otitis media and ear discharge. Having said this, I would also like to welcome our guest speaker for today, Dr. Ravi Meher, who is the Director, Professor, and Head in the Department of ENT, Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi. I would also request Miss Winnie Arora, ma'am, to please deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Dr. Aman. A very good afternoon to all the participants. Hope I am audible to all of you.
Yes, we can hear you, Winnie.
Thank you, ma'am. At the outset, I would like to welcome our ED, Major General Professor Atul Kotwal, sir. Under his guidance, this initiative was started 2.5 years back when NHSRC collaborated with DSPRUD, led by Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, ma'am. The objective of this STG series was to reorient the healthcare professionals on the updated standard treatment guidelines and enhance their clinical knowledge, especially the primary care teams. Based on the input received in the last two sessions, in the last two series, the changes have been made in this third series, where the sessions have been introduced from the primary and the secondary care facilities. So now the first session will be on the primary care facilities, and the second session is usually from the secondary care facilities. Also, I would like to update to all the participants that we have started with the one more series on the second and the fourth Thursday of every month for the primary care staff on how to implement INQAS in the primary care facilities. I will urge all the participants, those who have joined today, to kindly join that series also. With this, I would like to welcome Dr. Ravi Meher, Director Professor and Head Department of ENT Medicine, Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. I would also like to thank Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, ma'am. She's a professor in IBHAS and one of our eminent speakers. I would like to welcome her today also. Now, I will request our Executive Director, Major General Professor Atul Kotwal, sir, to kindly address the participants. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
I think, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I must compliment the DSPRU team, Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, and the NHSRC Quality and Patient Safety Division, led by Dr. Jayan Srivastava and his entire dedicated, motivated team, for initially thinking of this lecture series and also continuing and as per the feedback, changing and adapting to the requirements of the large number of our participants. And I'm told over 11,000 health professionals have till now attended the informative sessions which we're holding on alternate Saturdays since last more than 3 years now. And over 3,000 certificates have been distributed to those who have attempted the pre as well as post test in these sessions. And this third series, which is ongoing, as Dr. Winnie just now mentioned, it also focuses on some aspects of secondary care, also in addition to the primary care. And in every topic, in every session, we also include rational use of antibiotics and all to address the problem of AMR, which is, we all know, a very burgeoning problem as such. The Lancet report clearly brings out regarding the today's topic of importance of today's topic, about 1.23 billion individuals affected by bacterial ear infections worldwide annually. And 50% of these are under 5 children. Approximately million new cases of 1 million took place by this media, out of which 16 million, which has increased from 3 million from 16 million from 19. So these bacterial infections of ear are increasing year by year as we see. And the major issue is when it converts to chronic suppurative otitis media, and also leading to the involvement of the surrounding bones in many large number of untreated cases over the years. Children are at the highest risk, and of course, it can affect anyone at any age. So today's lecture focuses on ear infection issues. The sessions include management of acute and chronic otitis media and ear discharge by Dr. Ravi Meher, Director Professor and Head Department of ENT, Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi. And second talk will be on antibiotic overuse in acute infections, RV fueling resistance by Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, President DSPRUD. These discussions aim to enhance understanding of the strategies for detecting and managing ear infection cases and preventing any complications in future. I wish the large group of our participants, the specialists, doctors, CHOs, staff nurses, and professionals from other allied healthcare workers and professionals from other disciplines to get a benefit from this. Be interactive, ask questions in the chat, and of course, I hope all of you have filled up the pre-test and filled up the post-test also. With that, I'll stop here. Wish you all the very best for today's lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words. With this, I would now like to welcome Dr. Ravi Meher for his session on the acute and chronic otitis media and ear discharge. Sir is the Director, Professor and Head of the Department of ENT Medicine in the Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi. He has over 27 years of experience and is the ex-president and secretary of Delhi Association of Otolaryngologists and an executive member of the Association of Otolaryngologists in India. He is also a member of International Working Group on Endoscopic Ear Surgeries and has published the textbook of ENT and head and neck surgery and has more than 185 publications in various national and international journals. We welcome you, sir. I would request you to please share your screen for this session. Thank you so much.
May I add to his biodata? He's been a very active contributor in development of guidelines for ENT section, the standard treatment guidelines published by Delhi Society for Promotion of Rational Use of Words. So he's been for many, many years, I think, I don't know how many years now. Quite a long time now. You are on mute, Dr. Ravi.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
We can hear now.
So thank you, ma'am, and thank you NHSRC for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I will be basically discussing various ear infections, mainly the otitis media, which is very commonly seen in our Indian society. And as per the ICMR figures, we have almost of 5 to 6% of our rural population suffering from otitis media. So let me share the screen. Not getting.
File open hai.
So it is open, but it is saying switch to desktop app.
No.
Sir, should I share your
I think
PPT?
you can share it.
Okay, just give me a second.
Okay, thank
Sir,
you very much. So I hope everybody is able to see the presentation.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay. So next slide, please. So next slide, there is no conflict of interest, and some of the pictures I have used from Google Image and AI generated. So first of all, I would like to start with the basic anatomy and physiology of ear. Next slide, please. So everybody, I think this I'm going to recapitulate whatever anatomy and physiology of ear, and I'm sure you must be knowing about a majority of it. So the parts of ear, they can be actually divided into outer ear, middle ear, and inner ear. Next slide, please. So outer ear has got the pinna, the external canal, and the tympanic membrane. So pinna is basically made up of elastic cartilage, and it is covered by skin. And then we have external canal, which basically connects the pinna to the tympanic membrane. Next, please. Regarding the tympanic membrane, this is a normal tympanic membrane as you see on otoscopy. So this is the right ear, and when you see it on otoscopy, you will have a cone of light. So because the tympanic membrane is situated at an angle in the external canal, there is a formation of cone of light which is present in the anterior inferior quadrant, and then you also can see the handle of malleus. So this is very prominently seen. This is the handle of malleus, and all around the tympanic membrane we can see that it is thickened, and this is called as tympanic annulus, right? And you can also see a shadow of eustachian tube anteriorly, and in the posterior quadrant you can see the shadow of the incus and the stapes. So this is how it looks like a normal tympanic membrane, and the color is classically described as pearly white. Next slide. So next we come to the middle ear ossicle. So the middle ear is basically designed to amplify the sound which is received by the tympanic membrane, right? So we have three ossicles in the middle ear. These are very small bony ossicles. First is the malleus, second we have the incus, and third is the stapes. So they are all interconnected with each other, and malleus actually resembles like a hammer, incus resembles an anvil, right? And stapes actually resembles the stirrup of the horse, right? So all these ossicles are very important for amplifying the sound, and this amplified sound is then presented to the inner ear. Okay, next slide, please. So just to give us idea about how the ossicles and the middle ear look like. So this is a endoscopic picture of the middle ear. What you can see here, this arrow is the handle of malleus. The another arrow, this is a long arrow, the long black arrow actually shows the incus, and the white arrow actually shows the stapes, right? So these are the three ossicles, and they are all interconnected with each other, and the stapes is connected to the inner ear via foot plate, right? So that is how the middle ear looks like. Next slide, please. And then we have the inner ear. The inner ear is the part of the ear where you have transformation of the auditory energy into electrical signals, right? So the inner ear is actually the cochlea. The cochlea is the end organ of hearing, and we also have semicircular canals which are actually for maintaining the balance. So ear has two functions. One is to hear, and second is to maintain the body balance, right? So the cochlea actually has got lots of hair cells. These hair cells are actually present in the cochlear duct. Next slide, please. So the cochlear, these are the hair cells. The cochlear duct contains outer and inner hair cells, and they are basically responsible for converting the auditory energy into electrical energy. And this electrical energy is actually taken up by the eighth nerve, the cochlear nerve, and then the cochlear nerve gets stimulated and the signal passes to the brain. So next slide, please. So if you see the main function of the ear, the outer ear is actually acting as resonator. So there is some amount of energy amplification which is done by the outer external canal, and the pinna actually helps to collect the sound energy from the environment and present into the inner ear. So it actually acts like a resonator. The middle ear actually amplifies the sound so that the impedance of the inner ear fluid is overcome, right? So when the sound waves actually strike to water, 99% of the sound waves are going to reflect it back, right? So there's a lot of resistance, there's a lot of impedance, but the function of the middle ear, what it does, it actually amplifies the sound energy so that it is able to match the impedance of the inner ear fluid, right? And actually causes some displacement of the inner ear fluid, leading to movement of the hair cells, right? And the inner ear is actually act as a transducer. Transducer meaning the hair cells actually move and causes depolarization of the neurons, right? And this neuron depolarization causes stimulation of the eighth nerve, leading to hearing, right? So that is the main function of the three parts of the ear. Next slide, please. So this is the middle ear mechanism. What is happening? The sound waves are actually striking the tympanic membrane. When it strikes the tympanic membrane, it moves inwards, and it ultimately leads to the movement of the ossicles, the three ossicles, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And when the stapes moves inside, there is a movement of the inner ear fluid, that is the perilymph, and then it causes movement over there is shearing force over the inner hair cells and the outer hair cells, which lead to depolarization and generation of the electrical activity. Next slide, please. Something about the auditory pathway. So from the inner hair cells and the outer hair cells, we have the formation of the cochlear nerve, right? And these cochlear nerve fibers are basically the bipolar cells, which are actually the spiral ganglion of the cochlear nerve, and they actually synapse in the cochlear nuclei, which is there in the medulla. From the cochlear nuclei, it goes to the superior auditory complex, and then into the lateral lemniscus, then into the lateral inferior colliculus, and then it radiates to the primary auditory cortex, which is there in the temporal lobe. So the primary auditory cortex is actually responsible for the perception of the sound, perception of the sounds. Next slide, please. Okay, now we come to the topic. So today's topic is basically the infections of the inner of the middle ear. So otitis media, the term itself is self-explanatory. Otitis media meaning inflammation of the middle ear. Here the middle ear means middle ear cleft. So the middle ear cleft consists of the middle ear per se, plus it also includes the mastoid antrum, the mastoid hair cells, and the eustachian tube. This is because all these middle ear, the mastoid, and the eustachian tube, they are all interconnected, right? And they are lined by the same epithelium. So it is considered to be one entity, and it is called as middle ear cleft. So this infection is very commonly seen in infants and children, and it can occur in adults also, but it is very commonly seen in children. It is of two types: acute suppurative otitis media, and we have chronic suppurative otitis media. Acute suppurative otitis media means any middle ear infection which is less than 3 weeks. Chronic suppurative otitis media means infection which is more than 3 months, right? So in between 3 weeks to 3 months, we have some infection which is called a subacute otitis media, right? Next slide, please. So why it is more commonly seen in children? In children, it is mainly because of the fact that the eustachian tube in children is shorter, it is more wider, and it is more horizontal. So infections from the eustachian tube can easily pass into the middle ear, and that is why we have very high incidence of acute otitis media in children. In fact, almost every infant in first year of life will have one or more attacks of acute otitis media, and it is usually seen after upper respiratory tract infections. Next slide, please. So what is the cause? Basically, the cause of acute otitis media is bacterial infections, and it can also occur following exanthematous fevers. The common route for ASM is basically infection transmitted through the eustachian tube, and the most common organisms are gram-positive organism, which is streptococcal pneumoniae, and it is also very commonly seen with Haemophilus influenzae, right? So in children and infants, Haemophilus influenzae is one of the important causes. Next slide, please. So if we see the infection in the middle ear, which is acute type, there are 4 stages. The initial stage is a stage of tubal occlusion. So what happens in this stage? The infection actually passes from the eustachian to the middle ear, and there is an edema of the eustachian tube, and it causes congestion of the tympanic membrane. And classically, if you see this picture on the topmost, you have bulging TM with cartwheel appearance, right? So there's a classically you will see that there's a cartwheel appearance. It is because of the fact that the blood supply of the tympanic membrane is radially arranged. So these blood vessels, they actually get engorged and become more hyperemic, right? And leading to a cartwheel appearance. Then there's a stage of hyperemia, which is basically congestion of the whole tympanic membrane. The whole tympanic membrane becomes red and congested. It looks basically angry looking in the otoscopic finding. Then we have the stage of suppuration. In such stage of suppuration, there is formation of pus or purulent secretions are collected inside the middle ear, right? And there is a bulging of the tympanic membrane. So you can see that one of the pictures shows there is a bulge in the tympanic membrane. This is basically in the stage of suppuration. And at this point of time, when you have the stage of suppuration and the tympanic membrane is bulging, patient will have extreme pain. And this is because of the fact that the pus is under tension. And patient in these conditions will have extreme pain, and he will present to a ENT surgeon or to a hospital in emergency, right? And the last stage is the stage of resolution or complication. And what happens when the tympanic membrane is bulging and there is an increased amount of pressure in the middle ear, this tympanic membrane will rupture. And as soon as the tympanic membrane ruptures, there is a perforation. The pus is drained automatically into the external canal, and patient will have relief in the symptoms. So whatever pus which was under tension has got released, and the patient will now say that I am not having any pain, but now there is a discharge which is coming out of the canal, right? So that is the stage of resolution. And sometimes there can be some complications also. We'll discuss the complications of otitis media later, right? So these are the 4 stages. Next slide, please. So what are the symptoms? So as I told you, whenever there is an infection in the middle ear, patient will have extreme pain. This pain can be very severe and throbbing type of pain, which will lead the patient to emergency, right? In children, because they can't tell you that they are having pain, so there will be excessive crying, which is seen in children. Also in children, there can be fever, general malaise, there can be vomiting, irritability, and also difficulty in hearing, because the middle ear is now filled with fluid. So there will be conductive hearing loss, and patient will say that my ear is blocked or I am having difficulty in hearing. And this condition can be bilateral in children, which is usually preceded by upper respiratory tract infection. Next slide, please. So on examination, what you find? You'll find the tympanic membrane is congested, or sometimes you can find bulging tympanic membrane, which is just going to perforate, right? And discharge can be seen sometimes, and this discharge, because it happens after the perforation of tympanic membrane, there can be sometimes blood-stained discharge also, right? And usually when there is a discharge, patient will not have pain. Next slide, please. So what is the management? So management, which is initial management, is basically steam inhalation, because we want to improve the mucociliary clearance of the eustachian tube, and we want to open the eustachian tube. There is a problem in the eustachian tube functioning, right? So steam will actually help in that. It is important to keep the ear clean when there is a pus discharge, and avoid any water entering into the canal. Right? So that is a precaution which we advise to the patient, that you should avoid water, you should avoid swimming, and keep your ear dry. Next slide, please. So the pharmacological treatment. Because the patient is having fever and pain, we have to give symptomatic management. So for fever and pain, we can give paracetamol 500 milligram SOS for adults, and for children it can be 10 to 15 milligram per kg body weight, right? For severe otalgia, if the patient is having severe otalgia and it is for last 48 hours, and the temperature, there is a high temperature, there is a bulging TM, then this is the indication for starting the antibiotics. So the most commonly used antibiotic is amoxicillin. So because it's a gram-positive organism, Streptococcal pneumoniae, so it is usually susceptible to this amoxicillin, right? So we can give amoxicillin. The dose is 500 milligram 8 hourly for 7 days, and for children it is again according to their weight, 20 to 40 milligram per kg body weight in 3 divided doses is given. We can add xylometazoline nasal drops, right? So what it will do, it will actually help to relieve the congestion of the eustachian tube, right? So 0.1% nasal drops, xylometazoline nasal drops is given for each nostril 1 to 2 times daily, right? This is important to note that you should not be giving nasal drops for more than 5 to 7 days, right? Because if you give it for more than 5 to 7 days, it can cause rhinitis medicamentosa, right? So it can cause habituation, and can cause rebound congestion also. So this drug is to be used for only for short duration. For children, the concentration use is 0.05%, and again it can be given for 1 to 2 times a day. In case of ear discharge, when the tympanic membrane has ruptured, we can add ear drops, which is ciprofloxacin ear drops, which is more commonly used, 2 to 3 drops 3 times a day, right? And if the patient has associated upper respiratory tract infection, we can add antihistaminic, which is cetirizine 10 milligram per day, and it is usually given in night. So 10 milligram of cetirizine at night can be added. Next slide, please. So when to upgrade antibiotics? So usually the first line of antibiotic is amoxicillin, but if the patient has already received amoxicillin in last 30 days, or he has a concurrent purulent conjunctivitis, has a history of recurrent AOM, unresponsive to amoxicillin, we can start the patient on amoxicillin plus clavonic acid, right? So you can start the patient on combination of amoxicillin 200 to 500 milligram plus clavonic acid, which is 125 milligram 8 hourly for 7 days. So that is the treatment when you have a patient who is having recurrent acute otitis media and he is not responding to amoxicillin. Next slide, please. And when to refer the patient of acute otitis media to an ENT specialist? When there is no improvement or symptoms worsens even after 48 hours of medical management, patient is having intense pain, bulging of tympanic membrane, it is causing persistent fever, patient not responding to treatment, and patient developing features like vomiting and headache. So this vomiting and headache means that the patient is having some complication. So there can be complications of otitis media like facial nerve palsy. Patient can have dizziness, which points towards labyrinthitis. Patient can have mastoid tenderness, which points towards mastoiditis. Or there is a facial nerve palsy. Or if the patient is having vomiting, severe headache, photophobia, this points towards intracranial complication like meningitis. So if patient has any of these features, the patient should be referred to ENT specialist urgently. Next slide, please. So what is the surgical management of the acute otitis media? So if there is an intense pain and there is a bulging of tympanic membrane, we can give a small controlled incision on the tympanic membrane, which is called as myringotomy. So when you give a controlled incision, myringotomy, it will lead all the pus out and patient will have relief in his symptoms. So that is basically drainage of the middle ear pus, right? And that is done by myringotomy. You can also add a ventilating tube, or it is also called as tympanostomy tube, in case the patient is having recurrent attacks of otitis media, right? So if there is a recurrent attacks of otitis media, for example, 3 attacks in 6 months or 4 episodes in 1 year with 1 episode in the preceding 6 months, we can actually put a grome or a ventilating tube in the tympanic membrane, which will lead to ventilation of the middle ear and release of any infection which is there in the middle ear, right? So that can be done, and it will prevent further attacks of acute otitis media. Next slide, please. So what patient education you can give? You can ask the patient to take treatment for upper respiratory tract infection at the earliest, because the most common cause of acute otitis media is ASOM, and if there is most common cause is upper respiratory tract infection, so you must control the upper respiratory tract infection. In children and infants, the most common cause of ASOM is basically bottle feeding, and feeding while the child is lying down. So what happens when the child is lying down and you ask the child to feed with bottle, the milk gets into the eustachian tube. So it can go into the eustachian tube and cause infection in the middle ear, right? So one of the important causes is bottle feeding, and it should be avoided. Encourage avoidance of tobacco and smoke exposure. So it has been seen that children whose parents smoke, there is a higher chances of otitis media, right? So that is proven, and there are numerous studies which says that the parents should avoid smoking to prevent any middle ear infections. Also, the patient is advised not to instill any any oil in the ear. So that is very common habit of putting oil, and it can cause infection. It can cause otitis externa, and it can also cause middle ear infection if there is a perforation in the tympanic membrane. So next slide, please. We come to the next topic, which is the serous otitis media. So in serous otitis media also there is a fluid collection in the middle ear, but this fluid is not pus. It is not actually purulent secretion. It is basically non-purulent secretion which are collected in the middle ear, right? And it is basically because of the eustachian tube block, or when the patient has taken incomplete treatment for otitis media, the infection has subsided, but the fluid in the middle ear has not yet subsided. Patient with allergic rhinitis, they have high incidence of serous otitis media. So next slide, please. So this condition is also called as otitis media with effusion. So what you see here is basically fluid collection in the middle ear, and this is also called as glue ear, because long-standing middle ear fluid can lead to formation of very sticky fluid. So it is very difficult sometimes to clear the fluid from the middle ear, and it becomes like a glue. So it is also called as glue ear. Another term which is used for this condition is called as non-suppurative otitis media, because there is no pus formation, there is just a fluid collection in the middle ear. Hence, it is also called as non-suppurative otitis media. Next slide, please. So, what are the symptoms? What are the clinical features of a patient with serous otitis media? Usually, these are children. They will complain of hearing loss, or the parents or the teacher will say that the child is not listening, he is not very attentive in the class, and the parents will say that the child listens to music or watches TV at a very high intensity or volume of TV, right? So that is a usual complaint, and when you do a otoscopy in these patients, you might find that the tympanic membrane is retracted, or you will find that there is a air fluid level, right? Or air bubbles can be seen in some in the tympanic membrane with normal intact tympanic membrane. So these fluid is actually behind the normal tympanic membrane which has collected, right? And long-standing fluid collection in the middle can give rise to what is called as blue drum. So the incipitated secretions in the middle ear can give rise to an appearance of a tympanic membrane which is blue in color, right? The diagnosis is actually made on tympanometry. So tympanometry is an investigation which actually measures the impedance of the middle ear, right? And in tympanometry, what we find is that usually type B curve is seen in patients with serous otitis media. Next slide, please. So what is the management? So all these patients have basically hearing loss, right? They present with hearing loss, and initially there is no role of antibiotics because it's a non-suppurative otitis media. There's no role of antibiotics, antihistaminic, nasal decongestants, and systemic steroids for these patients. these children, they should be evaluated for adenoid enlargement also, because adenoid enlargement can cause to eustachian tube blockage leading to serous otitis media, right? So many of these children will require evaluation for adenoid enlargement, and that is usually done by either a nasal endoscopic examination or by getting an X-ray of the nasopharynx, which will show that the adenoids are enlarged, and that is the cause for eustachian tube blockage. What is the non-pharmacological treatment? We can actually advise patient to do steam inhalation and Valsalva maneuver, right? So if there's no infection or upper respiratory tract infection, the child can be asked to perform Valsalva maneuver. It is sometimes difficult for children to learn this maneuver. So there are certain devices or available which can be given to the children, and these are basically balloons which can be asked to inflate, right? So when they inflate, they actually open the eustachian tubes, right? So that is a treatment which can be offered. Pharmacologically, we can ask this patient to take steroidal spray. These are intranasal steroid spray, which have basically effect locally. They are not absorbed systematically, so they are safe to use. And these patients can be started on mometasone furoate or fluticasone furoate spray twice daily, and this will cause decrease in the edema of the eustachian tube opening, and it will also shrink the size of adenoids, right? So it will improve the function of eustachian tube. Systemic antibiotics are indicated only when the patient is having associated upper respiratory tract infection or acute otitis media. Otherwise, there is no role of antibiotics, antihistaminic, decongestants, and even systemic corticosteroids for the management of otitis media. Next slide, please. So, if the child is not responding to conservative management, then the child is referred to a tertiary care center. Middle ear effusion is still persisting after 3 months of conservative management. The child is having significant hearing loss, child is having eustachian tube dysfunction, or child is having cleft palate or craniofacial abnormality. So what is happening when you have a cleft palate? The eustachian tube area and the nasopharynx is open to infections, and whatever patient is eating or drinking, it is going to strike the nasopharynx, and it can cause infection. So patients with cleft palate can have chronic eustachian tube dysfunction. Similarly, patients with craniofacial abnormalities because of narrow nasopharynx can have chronic eustachian tube dysfunction, and these patients will require surgical management. The surgical management is basically myringotomy and insertion of tympanostomy tube. So these tubes are inserted in the tympanic membrane. They will provide ventilation to the middle ear and also drain any fluid which collects in the middle ear, right? And it can be combined with adenoidectomy. So in children, whenever there is a otitis media, serous otitis media, and they have enlarged adenoids also, we do the surgery in the same sitting. We do adenoidectomy as well as bilateral tympanostomy tube insertion. Next slide, please. So this was about the acute and the serous otitis media. Now we come to chronic otitis media. So chronic otitis media is basically of two types, right? Initially, it was classified as safe and unsafe type, but now a better classification is mucosal and squamosal type, because it has been changed to mucosal and squamosal type because even safe CSM can throw complication, right? So all safe CSM are not actually safe, and that is why we are using a newer classification, and we divide them as mucosal and squamosal type. So another thing is that we can also divide them into tubotympanic and atequantral type. Tubotympanic meaning it is involving the tube, the eustachian tube, and the middle ear, and atequantral meaning that it is involving the attic and the antrum. Right? So chronic otitis media has been classified into various types. So active chronic otitis media is basically when we have a central perforation in the tympanic membrane and the patient is having active discharge. So inactive mucosal type, you don't have any discharge and the patient has a normal middle mucosa with a perforation. This perforation is a permanent perforation. Sometimes what happens, the tympanic membrane can actually heal on its own, right? If there was a perforation, now the tympanic membrane has healed on its own, but this new tympanic membrane which has formed is thinner in nature, and this is called as healed tympanic membrane, healed otitis media, right? Inactive squamosal type and active squamosal type. So in inactive squamosal type, we have just a retraction pocket. There is no frank cholestoma formation. In active squamosal type, we have retraction pocket with frank cholestoma formation, right? So that is a classification. We'll go to the next slide, please. So what we see here is the mucosal type of chronic otitis media, right? So in mucosal type, as I told you, there is a central perforation. So if you see the picture which is lower down, the lower picture actually show us large central perforation in the tympanic membrane, and you can see a lot of middle ear structures also. Like we can see the long process of incus, and we can also see the round window niche, and anteriorly we can see the eustachian tube, right? So this patient has a central perforation, and this is called as inactive type of chronic otitis media. Any patient who has a central perforation but it is having active discharge is called as active mucosal type of chronic otitis media, right? So any patient who is having discharge is called as active. The ear is dry, it is called as inactive. Next slide, please. So the mucosal type, right? So what you see here are the different types of perforation we see, right? So the initial is the first picture shows the active discharge, which is active type of mucosal chronic otitis media. The rest of the three pictures are inactive type, and what you see is the central perforation. All these tympanic membranes have central perforation. In these patients, the discharge is usually profuse, and it is of mucoid character. Mucoid character meaning it contains lot of mucus which is coming from the middle ear goblet cells, right? And how to identify mucus? So this patient will say that there is a very sticky discharge which comes out, and when you see that in the clinic, when you try to clean the discharge with the earbud, it will form string, right? So that is the characteristic of a mucoid discharge, and it is non-foul smelling. There is no foul smell. It is usually intermittent because whenever the patient has upper respiratory tract infection, the ear will start discharging. You treat the upper respiratory tract infection, the ear will become dry, right? So there is an intermittent discharge, and there is no blood stain, right? So there are no granulation tissue, there is no cholestoma, so it is a non-blood stained discharge, right? So that is how you can actually identify that this is a mucosal type of chronic otitis media on history and examination. Next slide, please. So what is the medical management? So whenever there is a patient with a active ear discharge, you have to give medical management to make the ear dry. So how can you do make the ear dry? First and foremost is you have to clean the ear. Cleaning of the ear is very, very important, because if you don't clean the ear, the antibiotic ear drops which you give is not going to act. The antibiotics need to reach the middle ear mucosa for its action, right? So oral toilet is done, and oral toileting can be done by careful suctioning. If you have a suction machine and a suction cannula, you can use a suction cannula to suck out all the discharge. If you don't have that, you have to dry mop the ear. So dry mopping of the ear can be done by wicking. So the upper picture actually shows you a cotton wick which has been created by rolling the cotton, and this wick can be then inserted into canal and let it be there for 5 to 10 seconds. It will soak all the discharge, and you can remove the wick after 10 seconds, right? So that is called as wicking, and it is very useful in children, because children will not allow you to suction or will not allow you to put any instrument in the ear, right? So wicking is a good method to remove discharge, and if required, you can use 2 or 3 wicks to make the ear completely dry. Next thing, you can also use earbuds. So for making earbud, you can use a wooden stick, or you can use a Jobson probe and roll some cottons over the one end of the Jobson probe and use to clean the ear. So that is called as dry mopping, right? And all these patients are advised not to let water entry into the ear. So they should keep the ear dry. While bathing, they should put a cotton ball in the external canal so that the water doesn't enter into the canal, and they should avoid swimming. Next slide, please. So the management of a ear discharge, right? So any patient who has a active mucosal type of disease and there's a profuse ear discharge, you clean the ear and then prescribe antibiotics. The most commonly used antibiotics for ear discharge is ciprofloxacin, and ciprofloxacin is available in the form of ear drops, 2 to 3 eardrops are instilled in each canal for 3 to 4 times, right? And the patient can be given eardrops for 1 to 2 weeks, right? When you are giving the eardrops, you have to pull the pinna slightly upwards and backwards so that the canal becomes straight, and then you put 2 or 3 eardrops, and it will go into the middle ear. It will go into the middle ear mucosa where it is required, right? And keep the ear in the same position for at least 10 to 15 minutes for the eardrops to act. You can also use ofloxacin eardrops if it is available. Prednisolone and lignocaine and acetic acid. So if the patient has severe infection which is associated with otitis externa, there is a marked inflammation of the canal, there is edema of the canal, and there is pain also when you press the tragus of the patient is having pain. That means there is a involvement of the soft tissue of the canal, and in these cases you can actually add lignocaine. You can also add prednisolone and acetic acid. So this will actually improve the patient condition quickly. Acetic acid is basically added to basically change the pH of the external canal and the middle ear to acidic medium, right? So that will prevent the growth of pseudomonas, right? So prednisolone, lignocaine, and acetic acid can be added with antibiotics, right? We should not be giving any ototoxic drugs. So gentamicin, chlorphenicol, streptomycin, neomycin, these are all ototoxic drugs. Any patient who has central perforation or a tympanic membrane perforation should not be prescribed any ototoxic drugs. Next slide, please. We must add systemic antibiotics. So when the patient comes with severe infection, profuse mucopurulent discharge, there is associated upper respiratory tract infection, there is associated ear pain, and there is associated otitis externa, then you can add amoxicillin, right? So amoxicillin, it is same dose of 200 to 500 milligram 3 times a day can be added to these patients. And in children, it is given according to the weight, that is 20 to 40 milligram per kg body weight in 3 divided doses. Next slide, please. Okay, so when do we need to refer a patient of mucosal type of chronic otitis media to ENT surgeon? So management of mucosal type of chronic otitis media is surgery. If there's a perforation of tympanic membrane, it has to be grafted, right? So we need to do a meringoplasty or repair to the tympanic membrane, and it is to be done by an ENT surgeon. So if the patient ear is dry, he can be referred to an ENT surgeon for surgical management. Next slide, please. So these are some pictures of surgical intervention. What patient education he have to give? So in patient education, we always advise the patient not to allow water entering into the ear. Take immediate treatment in case of upper respiratory tract infection. Do not instill oil if there's a discharge, right? So there's a habit of people putting sarson ka tel or various types of oil. So that has to be discouraged because oil itself can cause infection in the ear, right? In case there's a severe pain, fever, discharge, or there's an increase in hearing loss, the patient should be referred to an ENT surgeon. Next slide, please. So next we come to the squamosal type of chronic otitis media. So we have already covered the mucosal type. In mucosal type, there is a central perforation and ear discharge, and which needs medical management and following surgical management with closure of tympanic membrane perforation. In squamosal type of chronic otitis media, there is a formation of cholestoma. So cholestoma is basically epithelium, squamous epithelium growing into the middle ear, right? And it is again of 2 types, active and inactive. So in active type of squamosal chronic otitis media, we have retraction. The tympanic membrane gets retracted because of negative middle ear pressure. There is no discharge and there is no cholestoma formation. So if you see the upper picture, in this the tympanic membrane is retracted. You also have some amount of pars flaccida retraction. There is a pars tensa retraction. You can actually see the tympanic membrane retracting and adhering to the middle ear ossicle, the incus, right? And this patient is a case of chronic otitis media squamosal type, but it is inactive type, right? So this is the inactive. So this is the inactive type. It is wrongly written as active. It is inactive type. And a patient who has a frank cholestoma is an active type of chronic otitis media, right? So there is a discharge which is there. There is a cholestoma which is seen as white flakes growing into the middle ear. Next slide, please. So inactive type of squamous otitis media, there is a retraction, there is a atelectasis. It is also called as epidermization because the whole tympanic membrane is now retracted over the middle ear bone, right? So this is the middle wall of the middle ear, the promontory, and the tympanic membrane is retracted on the promontory. So the middle ear mucosa is lost, and it is lined by squamous epithelium. And it is also called as adhesive otitis media, and all these conditions are actually associated with poor eustachian tube function, right? So this condition is called as inactive squamosal otitis media. Next slide, please. So what is the management of TM retraction? So what you have to, you can observe the patient, you can give sinonasal treatment because the most common cause for retraction is negative middle ear pressure, and that is because of poor eustachian tube. So we need to improve the eustachian tube function, and the eustachian tube function is usually deranged because of sinonasal pathology. So there could be allergy, there could be sinusitis, there could be polyposis, chronic rhinosinusitis. All these conditions can lead to middle ear retraction, and we need to treat these treat the sinonasal infections. You can also do eustachian tuboplasty, which is now upcoming field, and we can actually use a balloon to dilate the eustachian tube and improve the eustachian tube function. We can put a Grome or tympanostomy tube to prevent retraction. Sometimes surgical management is required for excision of retraction when the retraction pockets start accumulating debris, and can lead to formation and progression to a cholestoma. So in these patients, you might have to excise the retraction pocket or do marsupialization, right? So that is the management. Next slide, please. Previous slide, please. Previous slide. Can we go to the previous slide, please? Next slide. Okay, yes, right. So so active squamosal chronic otitis media. So in this you have cholestoma formation. What is a cholestoma? Cholestoma is nothing but it is a squamous epithelial which is there in the external canal. It grows into the middle ear, leading to formation of cholestoma. This cholestoma has bone eroding property. It can cause erosion of the middle ear ossicles. It can cause erosion of the surrounding bone of the middle ear, and it can lead to formation of intracranial and intratemporal complications, right? So cholestoma needs removal. It needs to be surgically removed. Next slide, please. So it can be classified as congenital cholestoma, and we can have acquired cholestoma. So this is a picture where you have cholestoma formation because of the retraction pocket. So initially the cholestoma formation is because of the small retraction, and ultimately it grows, and the whole tympanic membrane retracts into the middle ear, and there is a growth of the squamous epithelium into the middle ear cleft, leading to formation of cholestoma. Next slide, please. So I will not go into the details of pathology of cholestoma, but basic pathology is eustachian tube dysfunction leading to negative middle ear pressure, leading to retraction of the tympanic membrane. When this tympanic membrane retracts into the middle ear, it forms a cholestoma sac, which is lined by squamous epithelium. Okay. So again, this can be of two types depending on the etiopathogenesis. So when it is just a retraction pocket leading to cholestoma, it is called primary acquired cholestoma. When it is because of the trauma or surgery or accident, then also there can be growth of middle ear squamous epithelium leading to formation of secondary acquired cholestoma. So we go to the next slide, please. So that I have covered. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So examination of these patients is very, very important. And these, if you suspect cholestoma, these patients should be sent to an ENT surgeon who will carefully examine and see if it is actually cholestoma or something else, right? And make a diagnosis and further treat the patient. So examination under microscope or autoendoscopy is sometimes done, to identify these patients. Next slide, please. So what are the clinical features? What are the types of discharge you see? So in patients who have cholestoma, the discharge is usually scanty. And this discharge is scanty because there is a growth of the squamous epithelium. And this squamous epithelium does not contain any mucus cell, right? So there is no mucosa or mucus secreting cells. So the discharge is very, very scanty, and it is very foul smelling. Foul smelling because of the fact that there is in the cholestoma sac, there are a lot of desquamated epithelial debris. These debris, which are desquamated epithelial cells, these debris will undergo putrefaction. And whenever there is some amount of water entering into these cholestoma sac, it will cause foul smell, right? It can also cause blood tinged discharge because of the formation of granulation tissue. So along with cholestoma, there can be underlying bone erosion. Whenever there is a bony erosion, it leads to granulation formation, and it can lead to blood tinged discharge. The discharge is purulent in nature, and it is always continuous. No amount of antibiotic eardrops is going to stop the discharge, because it's a continuous process of bone erosion. So these patients will have generally continuous ear discharge. There will be also hearing loss. Hearing loss is because of the involvement of the tympanic membrane, and also because of the erosion of the ossicles. And what you find, we'll find the retraction pocket. Like for example, in the first picture you find there's a retraction pocket. I've shown you the picture of cholestoma, and in this picture, second picture, you find there are granulation tissue. These granulation tissue can lead to blood tinged discharge. Next slide, please. So these are all pictures of various types of squamosal epithelial, squamosal type of chronic otitis media. So here in the first picture you have a retraction pocket. In the second picture you have cholestoma flakes. In third picture also there is erosion of the bone. So there is a bony erosion of the canal as well as the middle ear, right? And in the fourth picture, sometimes these patients can actually present with polyp, oral polyp. So it is because of the edema of the middle ear mucosa which is presenting as a oral polyp, and behind the oral polyp you have squamosal epitheliums, which is the cholestoma, right? So these are the clinical pictures of patient with squamosal type of chronic otitis media. Next slide, please. So what is the management? So as I told you, active squamosal type of chronic otitis media will require surgical management. So any patient who is a case of suspected cholestoma should be referred to an ENT surgeon. And the aims of the surgery is to eradicate the disease, give a dry ear to the patient, and improve the hearing of the patient, right? Next slide, please. So what is the surgery which we do? We do the surgery depending on the disease of the middle ear and what is the extent of the disease, right? So sometimes we do a simple myringoplasty and tympanoplasty after excision of the retraction pocket, and sometimes we need to do a mastodectomy, right? So in the mastodectomy, we have to do sometimes canal wall up surgery, that is called as cortical mastodectomy, or modified radical mastodectomy, or radical mastodectomy, right? So that is the surgical management of cholestoma. Next slide, please. So what are the complications? So these patients, because it's a cholestoma disease, the cholestoma can actually erode the surrounding bone, and that is why it can lead to complications. So there can be various complications like intratemporal complication like facial nerve palsy. There can be labyrinthitis. It can lead to meningitis, brain abscess, extradural abscess, subdural abscess. It can lead to lateral sinus thrombophlebitis. It can also cause mastocytitis, petrositis, and otitic hydrocephalus. So these complications are seen with squamosal type of chronic otitis media, and if they are present or if there are symptoms or signs suggestive of these complications, the patient should be urgently referred to a tertiary care hospital or to a ENT surgeon in a district hospital where these complications can be managed. Next slide, please. So what are the signs and symptoms of complications? So these are the indications for referral to an ENT specialist. Any patient who has acute pain and he needs, he doesn't improve even after giving painkillers, this patient needs urgent referral because it could be mastoiditis. Patient in mastoiditis present with acute throbbing pain, swelling or inflammation of the external aortic canal. If there is swelling around the canal or inside the canal, or there is a swelling like there is a abscess, post-oral abscess, there is a abscess in relation to the external aortic canal, or abscess in relation to the floor of the aortic canal, these patients will actually require tertiary care hospital management. Right? Patient with high-grade fever and he is appearing toxic. So that means the patient is having meningitis, either meningitis or lateral sinus thrombophlebitis. So these patients will present with high-grade fever. There can be chills and rigor because of the release of thrombus from the lateral sinus into the systemic circulation, and these patients will appear very sick-looking and toxic. Right? If there is a facial of weakness or paralysis, if patient has vertigo or balance disturbance, right? So if there is a dizziness, there is a vertigo, it means that the patient is having labyrinthitis. So this patient also needs to be referred. Tinnitus or persistent ear pain is again, if the patient is having long-standing ear discharge and suddenly he starts having severe earache, that means that there is some complication. So this patient also needs to be referred to an ENT surgeon. Any suspicion of intracranial complication like headache, fever, altered consciousness, and when there is no apparent reason for earache, you can't find that what is the cause of earache, again then this patient needs to be referred to an ENT specialist. Next slide, please. We come to otitis externa. So this is another infection which can occur. Otitis externa means that there is an inflammation of the auditory canal. The external auditory canal is inflamed or infected. Right? It is usually viral. It could be bacterial, and sometimes it can be fungal infection. The most common organism is Staphylococcus aureus, and it is mainly localized to the outer part of the external auditory canal, because the outer part of the external aortic canal only has hairs and the sebaceous gland and the sweat glands. The middle part of the canal does not have these skin appendages. So the infection, the otitis externa, is usually seen in the outer part of the external aortic canal. It can also be seen in swimmers, right? So when you start swimming, the water can get into the canal, and when you try to scratch your ear with earbuds, it can lead to otitis externa. It can lead to inflammation of the canal, leading to diffuse otitis externa. What are the risk factors? Warm and moist environment is a risk factor for bacterial and fungal growth. Earbud trauma is the most common cause for otitis externa. Most of the patients who have otitis externa will have history of using earbud. So earbud, though they are covered with cotton, the cotton, it's also very abrasive. The external aortic canal is very, very sensitive skin, and when you use even a cotton, the cotton itself can cause abrasion in the canal, and these abrasions can get infected, inflamed, and leading to otitis externa. So earbuds should not be used to clean the ear. Rather, what happens when you try to clean the ear with earbuds, the wax and the debris will go further inside the ear, so it will be more difficult to remove it. Right? Hair follicle folliculitis. So I told you about the skin appendages, the hair follicles, and the sweat and sebaceous gland in the outer part of the canal. So these can get infected and can lead to otitis externa. And seborrheic dermatitis is also very commonly associated with otitis externa. Repeated otitis externa is seen in patients who have seborrheic dermatitis, and it is because of the fact that the canal skin is also lined with skin, and the skin is same as the rest of the body, right? So if the patient has dermatitis, seborrheic dermatitis in the other part of the body, there is an involvement of the skin of the external aortic canal also, and that can lead to recurrent episodes of otitis externa. Next slide, please. So what are the clinical features? Whenever a patient has otitis externa, you press the tragus of the patient. So when there is otitis externa, when you press tragus, patient will have pain. So he will wince with pain. That means the tragal sign is positive and the patient has otitis externa. Right? There can be pain in the ear, and there can be pain on the movement of pinna. There can be pain while chewing also. Patient says that whenever I am chewing from the right side, I am having pain, and when you see, there is otitis externa of the right ear. There can be associated hearing loss. This hearing loss is because of the edema of the external aortic canal. there can be diffuse inflammation of the ear canal with crusting and discharge from the ear, right? And uh, on examination, sometimes you will find the canal wall is so swollen that it is, I mean, you are not able to see the tympanic membrane. So there could be edema of the canal, and there can be discharge, there can be crusting in the canal. And itching is also sometimes seen. Itching is very commonly seen with patients having fungal infection of the external auditory canal. Fungal infection is also called as otomycosis, right? And tragal sign is positive, I already told. So this picture, the upper right picture, shows fungal infection. So otomycosis, you can see that there is a white fluffy ball thing like thing, and there are numerous spores which can be seen, right? And this is the patient. In the lower picture, you can actually see that there is some amount of vesicles which are formed in the external auditory canal, and that could be one of the features of herpes zoster oticus. So patient with herpes zoster oticus can also present with otitis externa. Next slide, please. So what is the management of otitis externa? So we have to clean the ear. Oral toileting is very, very important. Whatever discharge, crust, debris is there in the canal needs to be cleaned with a dry, sterile cotton wick, right? And if there is a lot of edema of the external canal, patient has extreme pain, lot of edema, then patient can be given ichthymol glycerin pack. So this ichthymol glycerin pack basically contains ichthymol, which is a petroleum derivative, right? And it has glycerin in it, right? So it basically reduces the edema. Hygroscopic action of the glycerin cause reduction in the edema, while ichthymol is a mildly antiseptic. So it will decrease the edema, it will open the canal, and patient will get relief from pain and swelling very quickly, right? So in case there is a otitis externa with edema of the canal, you can use ichthymol glycerin pack. Otherwise, patient should be started on amoxicillin capsule, right? For 5 days in doses which I have already described. If there is a fungal infection, as I showed you the picture, there is a white fluffy ball with spores, right? So this is called as otomycosis, and for management of fungal infection in the external auditory canal, it is very, very important to do oral toilet. You have to remove all the fungal ball by dry mopping or by suctioning, and then start the patient on antifungal ear drops. So antifungal ear drop, which is very commonly used, is a clotrimazole ear drop. So clotrimazole ear drops should be started, and it should be started only when you have cleaned the ear completely. Otherwise, patient will not improve. And if the patient is having extreme pain, you can start the patient on paracetamol, which is 500 milligrams twice daily for 5 days. So that is the management of otitis externa. When to refer to a ENT specialist? Patient should be referred to ENT specialist if the patient condition is not improving. There is extreme pain which is not resolving with analgesics. There is a swelling and abscess formation. So there is a lot of swelling in the canal. It is not improving, and there is a formation of pus. Also, it is important to rule out malignant otitis externa. So malignant otitis externa present with similar features, but in these patients, you will have diabetes. So there is associated diabetes. There is an associated facial nerve palsy, and when you examine the external canal, you will find granulation tissue, right? So these are basically patients with uncontrolled diabetes. They are not taking their medications regularly, and they have extreme pain which is involving the ear, and this pain can actually go to head also. So there can be pain in the complete head, and it is usually severe type of pain, and patient will not be able to sleep during night. So that is so severe pain. Right? So all these clinical features points towards malignant otitis externa, and these patients should be referred to a higher center for management of blood glucose levels and also of the malignant otitis externa, which will require long-term antibiotics. There can be viral otitis externa, which is called as herpes zoster oticus, and it is usually associated with vesicular rash. So there is a rash which is seen in the external canal, and it is associated with facial nerve palsy. So if there's a herpes zoster oticus, these patients should be started on antiviral treatment, and they should be referred to an ENT surgeon. Next slide, please. So lastly, many of these pictures were actually from my book. So you can read it if you want more information. Next slide, please. Next slide. So regarding the standard treatment guidelines, the presentation which I have done, most of these guidelines are actually from the standard treatment guidelines, which I had designed along with Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, ma'am. And you can read more about the management of ear, nose, throat condition in this training manual, which is published by the NHSRC, right? So these two booklets will be very useful for further reading. Next slide, please. So if you have any questions, you can ask me.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi, for such an elaborate description of the ear infections, and along with the pictures. I hope the participants found the pictures useful.
Right.
If there are any questions, you can write in the chat box. Dr. Ravi, would you be staying? Maybe I can also.
Yes, I'm here.
We can take the questions at the end.
Right.
Just continuing the dialogue further, I think you have from the presentation, you know that. Just a minute, let me just locate my file here. Yeah, I see. Yes, you can see my slides here.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
This is not, is it? Okay, now in full slide mode. Okay, we are worried about the use and misuse of antibiotics. And as you know, I think if you have to talk about the magnitude of the ear infections, it comes out to be a big number of people that who suffer from ear infections. And we all know that antibiotics are life-saving medicines. With the Alexander Fleming discovering the first antibiotic penicillin in 1928, and it was marketed in 1940. Thereafter, it has changed the history of modern medicine, and you can easily say that all our achievements today are because of these antibiotics. So with this penicillin being marketed, we had a golden era of antibiotics. A lot of new antibiotics came in, new classes came in, and today we see that our surgeries, our cancer treatment, transplantation, and otherwise even infectious diseases, we had been able to do it. But what is worrisome is that with this golden era of antibiotic, simultaneously the problem of antimicrobial resistance also came. Now, what do you mean by antimicrobial resistance? Here, it means that even in the presence of these antibiotics, the germs, the bacteria or microbes, they continue to multiply or grow. So that means, what does that mean? That the infections which were easily treatable earlier are not responding. We are not able to cure the patients. Sometimes even with simple infections, we are not able to cure them because of this development of antimicrobial resistance. So many of the concern is that perhaps we have had so many antibiotics and we have used it so much that we have reached the almost the post-antibiotic era. Post-antibiotic era is, you can say, even you have so many antibiotics available, but they are not effective. So this development and spread of AMR is happening because most of the patients are receiving antibiotics on one pretext or the other. Some even viral infections which are responding to symptomatic treatment, they are being treated with antibiotics. and I think Dr. Ravi will also agree, the most of the antibiotic use that we see is fear driven. That in case maybe this is bacterial infection, even most of these, if you had noticed in his presentation, he was saying most of the ear infections are again viral in nature. Antibiotics are warranted only in select conditions where the patient is having severe symptoms or is not responding for 48 hours, or there is a bulge, there is a imminent perforation happening. So then only you need. Most of these infections can be managed by symptomatic treatment. Steam inhalation is one of them that will help, and acute otitis media that you see is amenable, you can open the eustachian tube. So because of this overuse of antibiotics, and then when you need these antibiotics, it has been seen that when you can work with a simpler one, if you had noticed again in his presentation, he just said amoxicillin will suffice. But then in practice that we see, we start with the augmentin. We start with amoxicillin, clavulanic acid. This is needed when the patient is not responding to amoxicillin. So use of broad spectrum antibiotics, or when you don't adhere to the clinical guidelines, if the treatment says 5 days or 7 days, if we do, give it too short a course or too long a course, or repeated antibiotic courses, in a failed attempt to treat these where it needs the ENT surgeon's intervention. But if we don't refer them, these patients in a timely manner to ENT, so we may be trying to treat these with repeated courses of antibiotics, which will add to AMR. And of course, there is a huge problem of self-medication by the patients. Many of the times they report to the health facility late, and they may start putting taking these antibiotics on their own. So as I think I have already said this. Now, why are we concerned about this? The impact, now we see that the simple infections are becoming incurable. Or, if you could treat this with a simple antibiotic, but you need now a higher end antibiotic or an expensive antibiotic, and usually these have more toxic effects as well. So, they may need hospitalization. They may, their stay in the hospital may be prolonged. So antibiotics are a different class of medicines. They are different from paracetamol or antihypertensives or anti-diabetic. Here, individual use by the patient, antibiotic use by the patient has a larger impact on the communities. So many of the patients you may find presenting and saying, I never took any antibiotic, but you find that they are resistant. They are not responding to the usual antibiotic. This is because of the community effect of use of these antibiotics. So what do we, what options do we have? We cannot stop this AMR because this is a biological, natural phenomena, which has been defense mechanism being given to these microbes. So they are using it. And we've seen, from 1940 to, 2025, we've seen infections remain a significant burden of diseases. When these antibiotics were discovered, people felt that we are no longer worried about infectious disease. But if you look at the burden of disease today, infectious disease still form a big chunk of infections. So we haven't been able to get rid of these infections. So, and so is AMR, because this is a natural biological phenomena. We cannot stop it. All we can do is that we can contain it. We can slow down the development of antimicrobial resistance. Now, how do we do this? There are 9 common areas for improving antibiotic prescribing. One is we should not be over prescribing. When needed, choose the right one. Don't narrower spectrum. choose the appropriate route. If you can work with topical, work with the topical one. If most of the time you won't need oral antimicrobials for the right duration, don't use the wrong combinations. And delayed doses or omission are also responsible for accelerating AMR. So that also has to be kept in mind. So most of the time, I think the take-home message here is very clear. Acute otitis media, as it is usually preceded by URI and is often viral in origin, especially in children. So antibiotics would be, which are prescribed frequently, will be unnecessary because many of these cases spontaneously resolve without treatment. And watchful waiting is something that we can practice. Here in these ear infections, there are guidelines which recommend watchful waiting for mild cases, and especially if the child is less than 2 years, of course, you have to treat this immediately. But if the child is more than 2 years, mild cases, you can hold on to the antibiotics, watch the patient. If the patient's symptoms do not resolve or they get worsen, then antibiotics can be prescribed. But many of times in practice that we see, antibiotics are prescribed due to parental pressure or diagnostic uncertainty. So if you are very sure about the diagnosis, perhaps this watchful waiting of antibiotics can help. Then second most common chunk of presentation is chronic suppurative otitis media. You know the definition. Now again, prolonged and repeated courses of antibiotics, especially without culture and sensitivity testing, can lead to development of multi-drug resistant organisms. So if there is a discharge coming from the ear, culture and sensitivity test should be done. Now, most the topical antibiotics, they are better than the oral, as far as AMR, development of AMR is concerned. But even topical antibiotics have the potential to become develop antimicrobial resistance. And then second issue with the topical antimicrobials is that you need to look at the safety of these. Although fluoroquinolones are used topical, these are recommended. But if you use especially the aminoglycosides, especially if there is a discharge, tympanic membrane is perforated, this may get absorbed into the body and can lead to local toxicity or resistance. So be careful even with the topical ones. Now, common misuse patterns that we see, that any amount of ear pain without confirming infection, these patients are given antibiotics, or if they need antibiotic, we use broad spectrum when narrow spectrum agent would suffice, and failure to adjust therapy based on the microbiological finding. I understand at a primary healthcare level, even some CHC level, there is no microbiology facility available. It is difficult, but wherever this facility is available, one must avail and find out what is the sensitivity pattern and target antimicrobial therapy accordingly. Then treatment duration, as I said, too long or too short, this both can be a problem because it can lead to either relapse or increasing resistance risk. So as I said, the topical antibiotics, most of the time, if you see the guidelines, they will suffice. So you need to just take care of this. One word of caution with the fixed dose combinations. In ENT, most of the time you will find that there are several fixed dose combinations where several ingredients are there in one formulation. Usually it contains an antibiotic, a corticosteroid, and sometimes antifungal or analgesic agent too. Now, using these fixed dose ear drops without confirming the diagnosis, without making the presumptive diagnosis here, using antifungal Raftride when not needed can be a cause of concern. So avoid using this. be targeted here. You know what is the problem. If you you know that there is an infection, you need an antibiotics to use that accordingly. But I think Dr. Meher, availability becomes an issue because most of the commercial preparations that we have usually have it in combination. But I believe there are a single component eardrops are also available. So then again, don't use it for viral or non-bacterial conditions. Use these antibiotic like aminoglycoside, neomycin, gentamicin in perforated tympanic membrane, because it can lead to toxicity, hearing loss or balance issues can arise. So and also, you know, if you use multi-drug FDCs with analgesic, antibiotics, steroid, everything in it, it can mask the serious infections or delay appropriate therapy. So in general, just don't use these just because they have been properly have been available. Sinusitis was not the topic of today, but this is another reason where most of the antibiotic use happens. Now again, in sinusitis, this is most of the time viral in nature. We presume that whenever there is a sinusitis, it means bacterial, and automatically we prescribe antibiotic. Antibiotics are needed only when symptoms last for more than 10 days without improvement, or there are severe symptoms, high fever, more than 39 degree, facial pain, purulent nasal discharge persisting for more than 3 to 4 days, and symptoms worsen, initially improve and then worsen again. This is called double sickening after 5 to 6 days. So this is very, this is where you can practice watchful waiting for antibiotics. If the patient is not getting all right, or after improvement gets worsen again, then perhaps it is a bacterial sinusitis. You are free to write any antibiotic for this purpose. So again, even when this is sinusitis is there, then you need first line doxycycline, amoxiclavulinic acid, levofloxacin or moxifloxacin. Duration is 5 to 7 days, or 10 to 14 days in children or complicated cases. So when not to use, I think I always say the other way. The expert says when to use these antibiotics. I always go the other way around, when not to use these antibiotics. So simple common cold lasting for less than 10 days, they will improve without treatment. And non-infectious, do not mix non-infectious sinus congestions due to allergies, pollution, or structural blockage as bacterial infections. Many of the times I've seen patients, you know, this is true, particularly true about asthma. Whenever they have acute exacerbation, people think that it is bacterial infection and they are prescribed a course of antibiotic. But you know, instead of focusing on the antibiotic, if you can focus how these exacerbations happened, why did this happen, how can we prevent these exacerbations. So even in ear infections, prevention of infection is the most important thing that we need to look at. Some of our ear hygienes that which can lead to these infections, so we must educate the patients on this. So best practices seen in ENT is that you follow these clinical guidelines. Delayed prescription strategy or watchful waiting is another very good strategy. Use culture directed therapy in chronic and recurrent cases, and emphasis on ear hygiene, preventive care, and patient education. And integrate, don't forget, whenever you are doing stewardship program in your facility, don't forget ENT, because they are also the one where a lot of antibiotics are being used. So good ear hygiene, avoid inserting objects. I think he has very clearly said even cotton buds can hurt your ear, can cause abrasion. So and it will push the wax deeper, so don't do this. Keep ear dry, manage ear wax naturally, treat colds, allergies properly, avoid loud noise exposures. Home remedies, self-treatment, over-cleaning, all these things should be. So must remember, I think the one of the take-home messages, the hallmark feature of ear infections, always assess for pain, discharge, hearing loss, and fever. To differentiate between these types, you will find, if you look into all these four parameters, you will find you will be able to clinically classify them into different groups. And so an otoscopic examination is key for accurate diagnosis. So please do this. You will be able to see what is happening in the ear, and the diagnosis will be clear. So for each of these presentations, there are hallmark features, clinical features, which can help you clinically diagnose this and then treat these patients accordingly. I will not go into details. Dr. Ravi Meher already, so all of these features, pain, fever, hearing loss, this will tell you what's going on in the ear, and then you can treat it accordingly. Similarly, ear discharge, if you look at the nature, the smell, the duration of discharge, it will tell you the underlying cause. So, and always evaluate with otoscopy to check for perforation or a foreign body. So I think antibiotics, as far as I'm concerned, in my experience, I've seen prescribing antibiotic gives us the false sense of security. It doesn't mean that there is the danger is not imminent here. Because prophylactically, if we use these antibiotics, they have not been proven to be effective. If there is an infection caused by bacteria, certainly these are life-saving medicines. But if we use for non-bacterial causes, antibiotics are not going to help us. Only thing is that it is going to add to the problem of AMR. And we are worried about this AMR because there are no new antibiotics coming up now. The pipeline for new antibiotics is running dry. Pharmaceutical industry is not interested in discovering new antibiotics because they know the moment they will market this, they will not get a return of investment because misuse, overuse will happen, and resistance will develop. So they are interested in developing drugs for the chronic diseases, like lifestyle diseases like diabetes, hypertension, stroke, where once patient is diagnosed with diabetes, will have to take the treatment for lifelong. But here, in case of use of a life of a antibiotic is limited by the use of this. If you use the antibiotic, AMR is bound to happen. Use is the key driver. If we slow down, if we stop using, we then perhaps then we can slow down the progression of AMR. So I think whenever you are about to write a prescription for an antibiotic, stop, think about it. Is it really needed? Are there other treatments that are available which can help the patient? Most of the time, since it is viral in origin, symptomatic treatment will help the patient. So I think be antibiotic smart, know when not to prescribe antibiotic. Prescribing is easy. There is nothing much required in it, but to withhold antibiotic prescribing, you need to have a thorough knowledge and examination history of the patient to make a right diagnosis here. I think I'll stop here. If there are any questions, Dr. Ravi Meher is here. I'm also here. You can write in the chat box. I think, there are several questions here. Okay.
Thank you
Can
so much.
Valsalva maneuver be done in case of pus in middle ear? Dr. Ravi, there is a question.
Sir, you are on mute.
Yeah. Can Valsalva maneuver be done in case of pus in middle ear?
You are still on
Right.
mute.
Right. So, Valsalva should not be done in active URI. If you have active upper respiratory tract infection, you should not attempt Valsalva because that can cause infection going into the middle ear through eustachian tube. You will be actually forcing the secretions in the eustachian tube into the middle ear. So, Valsalva should not be done in active URI cases. Also, if there is a ear discharge, there is already a perforation, there is no role of Valsalva, right?
If patient has ear discharge, blood stain, itching, no pain, but a feeling of pressure in middle ear with URTI, no fever, history of tympanoplasty 10 years back.
So that basically this patient has undergone tympanoplasty, right? And now he's having some block sensation, and there's a blood stain discharge also. So we we need to actually look into the ear. We do need to do a otoscopy, and maybe this patient is having chronic otitis media with squamosal type because there's a history of blood stain discharge. So we need to do an otoscopy and find out the tympanic membrane findings and then refer to a ENT surgeon.
Your book is available. If you are interested, you can post the link, Dr. Ravi.
Yes, I can. It's available readily on Amazon and Flipkart and very reasonably priced, around 1100 rupees.
Why dose of paracetamol is so wide, 20 to 40 milligram per kg? How to take decision of dose?
So basically, paracetamol actually acts as an analgesics also, and it acts as a antipyretic also, right? So if you think the patient is having extreme pain, pain, you can actually give a higher dose, right? For simple fever, you can give a small, a lesser dose.
I think it is milligram per kg, and with paracetamol, if you are choosing a dose for a child, usually you go by milligram per kg body weight, and
Right.
there is always a maximum dose prescribed for this. But
Right.
it's, because
maximum dose is 40. I mean, it should not go beyond 40.
Because even repeated use of paracetamol is not safe. You can give only 4 doses in a day, 6 hours apart. Many a times patients present with paracetamol toxicity because either the fever was not coming down or the pain was not responding. So in panic, parents repeat the dose. So that is why maximum dose is also defined, but generally adhere to the 4 doses.
Right.
At all you have to repeat, don't repeat it before 4 hours. If you have to supplement, fever is not coming down, maybe you can add ibuprofen or any
Right.
other analgesic rather than increasing the dose of paracetamol.
Right, absolutely correct.
We have one more question. It says, in case of
can you, Dr. Ravi, can you just summarize the take home? Although I also said this, but I think take home messages, very important do's and don'ts when they see patients with ear infections.
So one thing is important, that you must be able to do otoscopy. So otoscopy is very, very important, and it's one of the certifiable skill now in MBBS, right? So all of us should know otoscopy, should be able to perform and see what is the tympanic membrane finder. It is very, very simple skill which can be attained easily, right? And you just need an otoscope, insert it into the canal and see what is the tympanic membrane like. If it is normal or it is central perforation or there is some discharge, so you should be able to perform otoscopy and diagnose and then refer accordingly, right? So that is one thing which I want to share with you. And second thing is that any patient who has ASOM doesn't need antibiotic, as Dr. Sangeeta ma'am has also emphasized. All these patients of upper respiratory tract infection do not require antibiotic at first go. all the upper respiratory tract infections are viral to start with. So they should be treated symptomatically. And only when the patient exhibit signs of bacterial infection, that means the discharge which is coming from the nose is colored, it is yellow or it is greenish in color, or discharge which is coming from the ear canal is yellowish, greenish, then only you start the antibiotic, right? If the patient is not responding, if he is having high grade fever, he is having some features of complication, then there is a need for antibiotics. So all these patients should not be straight away started with antibiotics. That is second thing which I want to tell you. And thirdly, timely referral of these patients is very, very important. Any patient who has CSOM is at risk of development of complication. So you must be able to diagnose the complication. Patient having ear discharge for very long duration, for maybe 5 years, 6 years, he is having ear discharge, but suddenly he starts having earache. It indicates that it is a complication which has occurred. Refer this patient urgently to an ENT surgeon. It could be a petrositis, it could be a mastocytitis, it could be meningitis, right? Any patient who develops facial nerve palsy, any patient who develops earache, dizziness. Dizziness is another one thing. If patient is having hearing loss, in sudden increase in hearing loss, again all these patients, or tinnitus he's having, or he's having severe earache, headache, all these are indications for immediate referral. Also, it is important to counsel these patients, because ear discharge, chronic ear discharge is a condition which is neglected by the patient. So if a patient comes to you with a ear discharge, you give him ear drops, make the ear dry, and then convince him to get a treatment. A definitive treatment for CSOM is now available. It can be done. You can repair the tympanic membrane. You can clear the disease or cholestoma from the middle cleft surgically. So these patients should be referred to a ENT surgeon, and it will actually help the patient, because he will become permanently okay. Rather than living with ear discharge for his life, his ear can become dry, right? So proper referral of these patients is very, very important. Awareness, creating awareness about the ear discharge and its management, which is available right now, is important. And these patients who have hearing loss can also be rehabilitated by appropriate assistive devices which are available by, like hearing aids. And if the patient is having profound hearing loss, we can also do cochlear implant. So the technology is now available, the skill is now available, and we must create awareness in the community for these conditions. Ear discharge is a very, very neglected condition. People don't get treatment. People don't get treatment for even for deafness, because it is not visible. Like I mean, they will just keep on lingering, and they will not get the treatment. They are averse to use a hearing aid. There is a social stigma attached to hearing aid. If you are wearing a glasses, you look intellectual, you look smart. But if somebody is wearing a hearing aid, he will, ये तो बहरा है. So that awareness you have to create in the society, in the community, that hearing is a very important part of your life. It is a way to communicate, right? So if you are not hearing, if you have discharge, you are not hearing properly, go and get the treatment. Treatment is available and it is free in government setup. Most of the government institutions are providing free of cost treatment. Even hearing aids are also available by the government of India free of cost. So it is basically, we need to make the patients aware, and counsel them, and advise them to get the treatment.
I think I'd like to add here, drug-induced hearing loss is one amongst the top 2 or 3 reasons for deafness. You know, we keep prescribing these antibiotics, gentamicin, things like that, and this can lead to deafness. So be careful about, you know, many of us think that these antibiotics are harmless. They are not harmless. They do also have side effects. Beside AMR, there are other side effects as well with antibiotics. So be careful. And once, if there is, usually it is viral in nature, starts with viral, antibiotics do not have action on viruses. Many of us think that we will be preventing secondary infections. So it doesn't happen like that. If there is a secondary infection, then you can always give antibiotic and treat that. But before that, if you give that, it will not be going to help. Dr. Ravi, how do you practice this? What is your experience with watchful waiting of antibiotics?
Okay, so as I have already told you, initially for 5 to 7 days of any respiratory infection, upper respiratory infection, there is no need for antibiotics. So that is basically viral in origin. Antibiotics are needed only when the patient does not improve beyond 7 days, or there is a second episode of sickening. Initially, patient is very sick, and he improves, and after some improvement, he has a second episode of again becoming very sick, and that indicates that probably there is a secondary bacterial infection, and there will be change in the color of the discharge. Color of the discharge will become more colored. It might become white, it might become yellow, or it might become greenish in color, or maybe blackish in color. That means if there's a color discharge, probably now it's the time for starting the antibiotic. Otherwise, if you have a simple upper respiratory infection, you just give symptomatic treatment, levocetirizine and paracetamol. Right? That is the treatment of choice for upper respiratory tract infection. Plenty of fluids and bed rest. Right? So, in case the patient does not improve, even after 7 to 10 days, then only you need to add up antibiotics. But what is happening, like people with simple cough and nasal discharge will go to the chemist and they will take antibiotic, and the chemist will give antibiotic because it is available without any, they will give without prescription, which should not be done, and he will give all sorts of high-end antibiotics. He might give you levofloxacin, saying that it is one daily dose, 5 tablets for 5 days, and you will be fine. So levofloxacin is a drug which is a broad spectrum drug, should not be used for simple URI. It is a second line drug for tuberculosis, right? Should not be used. So that is how we are actually misusing antibiotics. Rather, we should not be using antibiotics for simple infections, and we should have a very judicious use of antibiotics.
There is a question about gentamicin, whether it local can cause hearing. Although potential is less as compared to systemic dose, but there is a risk, particularly if you use it in a perforated eardrum cases, it can cause hearing loss.
Yes, gentamicin should not be used. Long-term gentamicin is associated with sensorineural hearing loss. And what happens when you put gentamicin? Gentamicin can actually permeate through the round window membrane and can go inside the inner ear. So once it goes inside the ear, it is toxic to the outer hair cells and the inner hair cells, and patient can develop sensorineural hearing loss. So gentamicin, streptomycin, kanamycin, all these aminoglycosides are very toxic. They can lead to complete hearing loss also. We have seen patients who are receiving ATT and they develop complete hearing loss. So it is very important that these drugs should not be used for ear infections.
So there is one more question. It says, in case of child pulling the pinna downwards and backwards, useful during the ear drop installation.
Okay, so the canal, external canal, I have not gone into the details of the anatomy. The external canal is actually tortuous. So in adults, when you pull the pinna upwards and backwards, that is how you have to pull upwards and backwards, it will straighten the canal, and you can easily see the tympanic membrane. You can easily install drops also. For children, it is basically to be pulled backwards, not upwards. You have to pull it backwards so that the ear canal becomes more straight and you can put the ear drops. So that is the only difference.
I think they had a very.
Are there any more questions?
There are not any more questions.
Okay.
I think.
If there are no more questions, should we wrap this session?
Please, post test link is there in the chat box.
Yes.
Please fill that, and also there is a feedback form. Please do provide us with your feedback. This helps us in improving our sessions here. And maybe you can also write the topics if you want for cover. Maybe in the next series, we can accommodate many of these. Next session will be on May 17th on common mental health problems that we see. And I think drug addiction is also there.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it will be an
Indeed.
important session because many of these patients first present to general physicians only. So at that stage itself, if you are trained and if you know the common presentations and the diagnosis, it helps in the timely treatment and referral of these patients. I think with this we will close, and thank you, Dr. Ravi, for coming to our session, sharing. Today had been a long session, but it's a long topic also.
Thank you, ma'am, for inviting me. It was a real pleasure to interact with everyone. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank
Sir,
you.
before closing the session, I think we have one more question. Somebody is
yes,
asking
yeah.
for the de-escalation of antimicrobial in the sepsis.
De-escalation is, sometimes in emergency or when the patient is very sick, you may start with 2 or 3 antibiotics. You may start with a broad spectrum antibiotic, but once the culture and sensitivity tests are available, microbiological organism has been identified, you know the culture and sensitivity report, then you can narrow it down. You can switch from polymicrobial therapy to monotherapy. That means from 2 or 3 antibiotics to 1 single antibiotic, or from a broad spectrum antibiotic to a narrow spectrum antibiotic. Sometimes because the patient is very sick, you may have to start with the systemic antibiotics, maybe IV antibiotics, because the patient, particularly when the patient is sepsis or coming up with the meningitis, you may have to start with IV antimicrobials. But after 48 to 72 hours, once the patient is stabilized and once the microbiological testing reports are available, you can switch to oral, because oral antibiotics, IV antibiotics have their own problems. Besides these local infections, abscesses, central line infections. So as early as possible, one should switch to the oral. There are criteria for switching to oral. If there is no fever for 24 hours, patient is accepting orally, there is a oral equivalent of an antibiotic, parenteral antibiotic, you can switch to oral. So, but what happens actually is, many of us believe severe means IV route. It doesn't. Severe does not mean that you have to always go for IV route. If the patient is accepting orally, the only criteria for parenteral, choosing between parenteral and oral is if there is a patient is able to accept it orally and there is a suitable antibiotic for that infection, which can be given orally, you can even start with oral antibiotics. So I hope I have explained this. De-escalation should be attempted at least after 48 to 72 hours. And now in the stewardship program, we say, target the duration of antimicrobial. Unnecessarily prolonged antibiotic courses also accelerate AMR. So work on the shorter duration of antibiotics as much as possible. Even with the long courses of antibiotic, patients' adherence also becomes a problem here. Patient may not complete the whole course, may miss some of the doses. So again, this will fuel antimicrobial resistance. So it has been seen that just give it for appropriate duration. Don't prolong or don't give it for short duration as well. If you need it for 5 days, you need it for 5 days. You can't say I will stop it after 2-3 days, because there is a tendency all the time, once the patient starts feeling better, the compliance goes down, and patients may discontinue or may miss some of the doses. So if adherence is a concern, choose antibiotics accordingly. Try to choose antibiotics which are given once or twice daily, and link it with some patient's activity, breakfast time or lunch time or dinner time, so that they don't miss their doses. Pediatric sepsis and post-perform sepsis. Okay, I think that this is done.
Okay, ma'am, I think we do not have any more questions.
Yeah.
So with this, I would like to thank both our speakers, Dr. Ravi Meher and Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, for sparing their precious and valuable time out of their busy schedules. I would also like to thank all the participants who have been very kind to attend these sessions on a Saturday afternoon. And I would like to inform that we have already shared this link to the post test in the chat box. Also, there is a link to the feedback, and those who have been new to this series, there is one more link to the Quality and Patient Safety Division YouTube channel. You can always visit that channel and have a look at the previous sessions which we have conducted in the last three series of these STG sessions. And also the recording of this session will also be available on this same YouTube channel around 5 to 6 days after this session. And you can always go back to the YouTube to visit these sessions again and again. And
Dr. Ravi, there is a question. I don't know, question is not clear. Mother to baby AMR, how can this relate in this condition? I didn't follow. What is the question? Could you follow?
So basically, probably this is not related to present session. So that is what he's trying to write, that it is not related to this condition. Right?
No. See, I said antibiotics are a different class of medicines. They are different from other classes where, if you take a medicine, it has an effect on individual. But antibiotic is a class. When you use it individually, it has a larger community implications, because it is then the resistant germs which are spreading. Individual use will lead to development of resistance. The germs will be resistant to usual antibiotics, and when they are spreading this infection, the resistant germs will be spread. So then others who had not taken this medicine, antibiotic, but still will, because now they are infected with the organism which is resistant. So that is why they need a higher antibiotic. So that is the larger implication. That is why we are worried, because you can take the example of TB. TB earlier, it was a community acquired TB, which was sensitive to first line anti-tubercular drugs. But now, because of the growing resistance, MDR TB, now it is the MDR TB which is spreading. So that is why the MDR cases are rising. XDR cases are rising, because these patients are harboring these multi-drug resistant organisms, and this is what you are spreading. So that is why we are worried about these antibiotics, and we want to preserve the power of these antibiotics. I think we can close this session. No?
Yes,
I think AMR is something that we can spend hours on that.
okay, ma'am. I think we do not have any more questions, so we'll close the session. Once again, thank you, Dr. Ravi Meher sir and Dr. Sangeeta ma'am, for giving wonderful insights on this much needed important topic of ear discharge and otitis media. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the participants as well. Thank you so much. We'll be now closing the session. Thank you.
Thank you very
Dr.
much.
Ravi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.